So welcome to the Ep145 Construction Podcast. I'm Brad Levitt, and today we have Luke Mezger on with us. Welcome, Luke. We'll start again and pause there. Did you hear me?
I know either you're extremely still or your feed has frozen.
Okay, am I frozen now or am I good?
I can hear you, but your video is frozen.
Okay, don't worry about the video. So as long as you can hear me, because it's recording perfectly from our end, I can see you. You're moving perfectly. Everything's good. So we're going to start now, okay?
Cool.
Yeah. So welcome to the Ep145 Construction Podcast. I'm Brad Levitt, and today we have Luke Mezger on with us. Welcome, Luke.
Hey, thanks, Brad, for having me. I'm excited to spend some time talking with you.
Yeah, it's been long overdue. We met at the Builder Show. This was, 4 or 5 years ago. It was in Vegas right before COVID, right?
Yeah, it was 2019. So we were also at the 2020, right when it was cranking up, but it didn't.
You're right.
It didn't affect that one. So we met that was February 2019.
Yeah, it's been a while now, and I've been a big fan. We met there at the, I think, Sugut. How do you say it? I'm trying to remember the hardware company. Yeah, Sugut. There you go. It's a tricky one, but they have some amazing hardware. I know you actually went there recently. Didn't you go with Matt out to Switzerland to see their operation?
So we went to the Sega tape out in Switzerland.
Okay.
Suga Suni's in Japan.
Okay.
But yeah, I think I only got on Instagram I think in 2017, and then I think I might have been following Paul, your project manager, before he moved over. I could have gotten those dates wrong, but anyway, and then I started following you, and then I was walking around and I looked up and I saw you and Paul together, and I was like, oh, I know those guys, and walked up to you and introduced myself and to you and to Paul, and right after that I DM'd you, and we've been IG buddies ever since.
Yes, we have, and in fact that takes another turn now because it was interesting. Matt Reisinger came out and we did some videos with Matt on the Net Zero House for Mark Law Liberté. And while we were in the truck driving, we're just speaking about, because I'm like, hey, I know you're close with Luke. And he's like, yeah, in fact, our wives are friends, our kids, and we live close to each other. And, he said nothing but amazing things about your business, which I've seen from afar and, meeting in person at the Build Show. Of course, being that you're in Austin, I'm in Scott, so we don't get a ton of time together. But he made a comment. He said, Brad, Luke actually is super interesting. He has his own accounting software. Like he's built his own system that he does himself. And I'm like, hold on, I need to ask Luke about this, because he's like, you need to ask him about this because it's super impressive what he's done.
Yeah. So when I was thinking about starting my own company, I started thinking about, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to run it? And I started looking into QuickBooks, and there's like a monthly subscription fee. And I was like super adverse to having any extra overhead starting out. And I was like, I think I can do this. I think I can make my own software, accounting software, out of Access. And for those that don't know what that is, it's a database programming software from Office. So if you buy the full-blown Microsoft Office package, you'll get Access with it. And most people don't know what it is, but it's a database program. And through other companies I'd worked for, I've kind of understood how databases work and how you have to set them up to get the outputs that you want. It's all about making sure designing the inputs in your tables so that you can extract whatever data you want to in a useful manner on the other side of it. So I started monkeying with one, and before long, a couple months into it, running some trials, I had pretty much invented my own accounting software. So I didn't want to pay QuickBooks their monthly fee, so I came up with it on my own.
So hold on, it's interesting about that. I was just going to ask, between, QuickBooks, as opposed to Access, I mean, there's still time vested, right? I mean, did you do Access in college? I mean, how did you have just at least enough expertise to build those tables, the back-end support, to run that system?
Yeah, I got a little bit exposure to it in college. And then the first company I worked for, which was Mezger Homes out of Florida. So I was in Austin, but they had their main home division was in Florida.
So what's funny about that, if I interrupt you, so Mercedes,
go for it.
When I was actually finishing construction management in college, I went on the recruiting trip to Florida, and I think I'm pretty sure they gave me an offer for like the Treasure Coast, I think it is. And I almost took that offer to Mercedes, but I ended up taking an offer in Arizona. So it's probably the right move for me. It ended up working out, but small world.
Yeah, small world. So they had a huge, their own proprietary database system. I think it was called Starlink or something with star in it, but got to understand how you set it up. And so I started out as a builder with them, and then eventually I was in charge of purchasing for the entire Austin division. And we had it dialed in to where we could say, hey, we're going to build this 2737 plan. I think we named them after their square footage. Their B elevation, we're going to build it in this subdivision with these options tacked onto it. And so once you select all those check boxes in the database, it can then spit out purchase orders for you. So it knew the vendors that were marked for that neighborhood. It knew all the interrelations between the base price and all the option prices, and it tabulated all that together and spit out, a piece of paper per vendor that had all the options on it and agreed upon price. So I was like, wow, this is really powerful tool. I really got my mind and grasped how databases work. And so I just started applying that to, okay, what do I need? Like when a vendor turns in the invoice, well, I need to have the vendor information in there. So I have a table with their name, their company name, their address, their EIN or their social security number, if they're tax exempt, when their general liability expires. And then when you input the invoice, you've got to put in the job site address. So that's another table. And then eventually, you have your estimates in there. And so you can say, line item 1 on their invoice is for this cost code, it's for this amount. And I've even set up formulas to where when we're inputting invoices, and once you type in the address and the cost code, you then get to see what's been spent on that cost code and what's left in the budget to spend on that cost code. So whenever we're going through, we know immediately. So let's say the plumber's putting in his final invoice and it's for $20,000 for the trim out draw. And we're like, oh, there's only $18,000 left in this budget for that. Immediately a red flag gets raised. And so my, accounting person can be like, why are we over? Did we do an unauthorized change order? Did they have to do something on site that we should actually code to punch instead of coding to the plumbing cost code? And so it just gives me the power to figure out budgeting issues before they're much of an issue.
No, what's interesting about that, I mean, not that there's risk because you understand access, and you've built this incredible database and you have the cross-checking, right, to make sure you're not double paying or that, red flags are brought up, right, if there's an issue with the invoicing. But, as you've grown as a company, do you feel it's been still working efficiently for you? Do you feel there's any setbacks or, have you thought about changing maybe the software internally for accounting?
I've modified it a little bit, added a few extra reports along the way. I love it. I don't think I'll ever switch. Like if I want to know, I can parse out any information. I can do cash flow analysis, and maybe QuickBooks does this too, but where I can make charts based off the cost of a job on a bi-monthly basis versus the cash flow in the draw schedule, and I can see if, hey, did I stay ahead of cost the whole time on this project, or am I running behind? All my IRS forms and reports I've made, and so it's just every month I click a button, I figure out how much I owe the tax man.
You're killing me. This is amazing to me because I'm sitting here thinking like the complexity. Like anyone that's a builder, we know the complexity of day-to-day, just building, construction, trades, purchase orders, change orders, everything we're dealing with as a builder, working with subs. And here you are building your own accounting software and your own database. And then what's really tricky and all the time I've spent with contractors and even starting my business where a lot of contractors really get, I don't want to say in trouble, but where they really miss the mark is they may be good contractors, but they're not good businessmen. And by that, it really comes down to the financials, right? A huge thing is cash flow, which is a big problem that depending on if you're like lump sum or cost plus, how you're billing, taking deposits, how you're tracking that and accounting for it. But more importantly, especially accounting is a little bit tricky in construction because as you mentioned a little bit earlier, you have job costing, you have WIP, your work in progress. And if you're not running these numbers accurately on what your projected profit will be on the job, because none of our jobs finish, January to December, it doesn't work that way. You're crossover year to year. And so paying taxes, making sure you're not overpaying or underpaying, that WIP becomes a super important number. And so essentially you've alluded to this, Luke. Have you captured just through the database, like you fully understand that job cost and WIP, and it's just been very successful for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. And so at the end of the year, with my accountant, I run like 4 reports and talking about the percentage. I do percentage complete for the tax
for the WIP.
Yeah. And so yeah, I've just have made all these custom reports and queries in my database, and it's super simple. Yeah, I can tell you down to the penny where we're at every 2 weeks.
It's incredible. I mean, I'm fascinated, and here's why. So my only experience with Microsoft Access, I didn't do anything with it in college, but I worked, as I mentioned, I didn't go to Mercedes Homes. There was a production builder, which was a great experience for me, out of college. So for the first year out of college, I worked for a company called Trent Homes. And then I went to a company, Roland Luxury Homes, before starting AFT. And so I had that 6 years of experience out of college. But both companies used Microsoft Access, really, as you mentioned. I mean, you were in purchasing with Mercedes, but for the field, the punch list. So we could put in the database all the subcontractors, all the jobs, lot numbers, projects. And so as I do my punch list as a superintendent, I can go into Microsoft Access, their database pull down menu, so I could pick the trade, do the punch list, input the item. And it was great because a lot of our trades, at least in the production world, would print off, 5 a.m. that morning, their punch list. And so I could essentially do my punch list at 10 p.m. the night before. It's uploaded in Access, spits it out, purchase order. They print it off in the morning, and then they're already taking care of the punch list. It may be more difficult today in our building market, but back then when I was out of college, it actually worked pretty efficiently. So are you using Access outside of accounting or just for accounting?
No, just for accounting. And don't you wish we got the same service in our custom world as we used to get in the production world with warranty and punch list?
Oh my goodness, it's so difficult. But not only, and this is why I wanted to bring you on, Luke, because and we'll get into some of the building science and some amazing things you're doing down in Austin, in your area that's tremendously growing. But Dwell Magazine, talk to me about Dwell Magazine, because that was, that's a huge deal for you. So.
Yeah, no, that was a fantastic project. It was our St. John's project, and it was actually an architect from Houston who was really good friends with the owners. I think they went to college together, and they were like, "Hey, one day we're going to build a house, and one day you're going to design it for us, and it's going to be awesome." And sure enough, 15, 20 years later, it came to fruition. And so I remember a commercial. I think it was back in the 80s or 90s where it was like an architect and a client, set up, and the client walks into the office and they're holding like a plumbing fixture, and they're like, "I want you to design the house around this." And they throw down a plumbing fixture, and it was like a commercial for like Kohler or something like that. So if you don't remember that, don't worry about it. But it was essentially the same thing, but it was with the brick. So they loved this brick, and so they wanted to make sure every single turn or termination in this brick course was equal with the brick size. So either half brick or full brick. So all windows, all doors, all exterior corners, interior corners, all were that same dimension. So that, it was perfect. So every window had half or full course brick on it. But no, it ended up amazing. And then, it was a beautiful house.
So family, of course, house. You passed math class. I mean, you and your architects, right?
It worked, right? Yeah. I mean, the houses get built as easy as they get built in SketchUp, right? I mean, you draw it on paper and boom, it's magic.
And if you know the measurement of the product you're using, I mean, you just forecast that and then you plan for it, right? How did that come in with Dwell? Because that's a pretty big deal. I mean, what was the connection? Was that something you pushed, the architect pushed? Speak to that relationship, because the reason I ask a lot of us builders, and one of the questions I often get from young builders or even designers and architects, is like, how do you get to that level where you have something published in a national magazine? Like, how do you build those relationships? How does that come to fruition? Is there an application? Is it just networking? Where does that come from?
That's a great question. I think you got me stumped. I might have, we were super proud of it. And so the architect and I had a professional photographer come in, we photographed it. And I believe he reached out to Dwell because we couldn't post anything about this house before they had first stab at it. I think that's part of their agreement.
Which a lot of magazines are that way, if I interrupt you. I mean, they'll come in, and if they know that you're in line to be published, they're going to limit any, website publishings on your website, any social media, because they want to be first to release. And then, maybe they have 30, 60 days after publication that you can then put live on the website.
Yeah, I've got two more homes that I've recently built that turned out fantastic that I can't publish yet because of the same reason. I'm like, wow. I
Yeah, I
just
need
wish
that
they'd
content.
make up their mind one way or the other, so I can get some traction out of these awesome pictures I took.
So were there any requirements? And the reason I asked about Dwell, truth be told, I haven't been published by Dwell. Lux Magazine's one, and with Lux, they have a requirement that, of course, you have to have an architect, you have to have an interior designer, house has to be furnished, and there has to be a client. It can't be like a spec home because they really want the whole story of the whole team, right? Builder, designer, architect, client, right? That whole transition, and so that's kind of their MO. So I know for anyone listening, I mean, as you're thinking about marketing, just as you have networking events with some of these companies, like, and again, social media. It's funny, Luke, you bring up the example of your architect that he knew these owners from college. And it's funny, you think about these relationships, and this is where a lot of us have to look not to the next 6 months, but maybe 10 years from now as we're building our business. And, I find that a lot of clients I'm working for now, I mean, these are friends that I've had for 20 years, college, basketball, just different, environments, neighbors that I've met with, LinkedIn connections. And then over time, you build that rapport and camaraderie, and they're like, hey, Luke, you're going to build my house, and maybe 10 years from now, but they're at a point in their career where they have the means to do it. And, so you always have to be laying those seeds and planting those down because you never know which one will grow, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So, outside of Dwell Magazine, I know you're super involved in building science, and you do a lot of really instructive videos. I mean, for anyone that you'll put your social media handles to follow, where does that passion come from, getting into the building science and the envelope?
Yeah. I think I read a book. It was The Power of Why. And I kind of took a deep dive into like, why do I focus on these things? Why do I like building? Why am I the way I am? And it boiled down to like, I love efficiency. So when it comes to like the systems I have set up in my company, like I love efficiency. So of course I'm going to have processes and systems everywhere I look. Whenever I think about, the energy use of my homes, like I don't want to waste energy. And so I want to be extremely efficient with the houses I build.
And why though? I mean, if I interrupt you, I mean, what you mentioned the power of why, but as a builder, it's really easy, or designer architect, to say, hey, I need a project. I have a client. They may not be passionate about that. So it's easy for me just to like build their house, and it may not have anything I would like or like to do for my brand, but I have the project, I'm building it, essentially moving forward.
Yeah. I think I want to be good stewards with what I'm given. So if I'm going to build a house, I want to make sure that I'm being a good steward of that resource. I think it just goes back maybe to an efficiency idol. But no, I just have a passion for excellence. Part of it's just the way I'm wired. Like if I feel like if I built that house right, like I'm going to be above reproach. I'm not going to get in trouble with my owners or the city. So part of it's just my core motivation of staying out of trouble by doing the right thing. And to me, doing the right thing is building the home a certain way and making sure that it's well built and not going to rot in 10 years or make my clients unhealthy. That indoor air quality, it's something you don't see and sometimes you don't notice, but it can have serious health effects with asthma and mold and certain chemicals we're putting in our houses and things like that.
So do you ever have any pushback? And the reason I ask, because right now in this market, pricing's escalating, materials more expensive, and all clients have a budget, no matter what it is. And it may even be that they may have the financial capability to spend more, but they look at this realistically and say, hey, in my neighborhood, it's not going to appraise. I can only build to X square foot. How do you bridge that gap where you're trying to say, okay, and it's not even, hey, I'm the cheap guy, but it's more, hey, there's some minimums, or there's some building science standards that I want to implement in your house. How do you marry that with the budget, which is always a tricky conversation?
It starts up front with me. So I kind of have a baseline of specifications that I'm going to build to. I mean, one of those is the zip system sheathing. Like I'm always going to put zip systems sheathing on my house no matter what. And I'm always going to tape the sheathing to my foundation using Sega Fincham tape. And I'm always going to put in a variable speed blower on my AC systems with at least a 2-stage condenser. And I'm always going to use a dedicated dehumidifier. and I'm always going to do a semi-conditioned sealed attic. And so I could go on down the list, but those are kind of things that are, those items are a necessity with me. And so whenever I do rough pricing with clients, those features are already baked into the rough numbers from the get-go.
So now, how often are you involved in the design process, though? Do you ever have clients coming in where they've already met with the architect and the house is done, or are you involved at the beginning?
Yeah, 80% of the time I get hired on under a professional services agreement after the DD, the design drawings, the concept drawings, when they only have, rough floor plans and maybe 4 elevations drawn, so that I can start steering the ship with design concerns. And so if they start always, they talk about, feature creep. If the clients keep taking a left-hand turn and never take a right-hand turn, they're going to end up way off the rough budget. So, no, I love getting in early on the stage, and helping be that voice of reason whenever they like, maybe we shouldn't cover that whole wall with tile that's $100 a square foot. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't have all this glass here, So yeah, and then the other 20%, they come to me with finished plans, and it eventually it works out. That's why it's 20% of my business. But yeah.
So architects, are they pretty open to working with you? I'll say, before you answer that, I mean, I look at our market here in Phoenix. It's very similar. Most of our clients come to us first, or at least we're involved in the very beginning, right? So we can work through this. And this is where it's very collaborative because, architects, depending on how big of the firm and the draftsman they're working, there's some firms we work with that have 25 employees, right? And some that maybe have 2. And so they may have their own standard of like a masonry stem wall or a poured in place concrete stem wall, or, insulating the foundation, or, as we're talking about SIPs, trusses. And so the good ones will ask and say, Brad, are you typically using like tankless water heaters? And then so they have these questions on how we do our stem walls, things that we're particular about, as you mentioned, this list, and that way they can incorporate it. So having that communication now really helps in design, function, as well as budget.
Yeah. So one of the first meetings with the owners and architects, as we decide to continue on with the plans, I've got a 10-page specification template, and we'll at a real high level view talk about, hey, what do you want to go to zip R? Because if so, let's try to integrate that into the design and push out the slab a little bit so that it's flush with the slab. All kinds of things. Yeah. So from a very high level early on, we're having those discussions, and maybe the architects have always done it one way. They've always been open. Like, how do you do it and why? And they're like, okay, that's fine with me.
I love that you said that, because I actually had a note here. I was going to ask you, from when you talk about your minimums, is this something that's documented? Because earlier you mentioned procedures, which we'll get into, but, systems wise, how have you refined that document just to come in prepared to sit down with the architect and client? And it sounds like you do have a 10-page, you have a working doc to always reference on.
Correct. Yeah. So it's the beginning of our specifications. And so, I mean, it's fun. It's like every time I've got, not an argument, but anytime I've lost money on something, I'll be like, why did I lose money on this? It's like, well, maybe I didn't set expectations properly. Okay, well, can I set expectations properly next time with it being listed in the specifications? Like, yes, okay, let's change this. So I've kind of narrowed it down to the things that I think are important, and because if you go down and start writing every single specification for like the quality of the PEX and the chemical composition of the paint, and I mean it would be 100 pages long and no one would ever read it.
Right.
So I've kind of gone through every cost code. Instead of organizing it by division, like the AIA divisions, and so you'll have like page 1 of the plans is chock full of 8-point font, and that I'll read it. I mean, it's my job to read it, but none of my subs will ever read that stuff. So I'll go through there and I'll start parsing out the important information, and I'll reorganize it per cost code so that when my plumber opens up my bid package to him, all the important information for him is in one paragraph, labeled plumbing. Whereas like metals, the division metals, my ornamental iron guy might have to read there, my gutter guy might have to read there, my roof guy might have to read there. And so I organize it by cost code instead of division.
Which is really important. And so if I understand correctly, when you actually get the bid set to send out for bid, you're not just getting that electronic file with all the plans and emailing it out to all your trades, you're actually going through that, putting together essentially a scope document, a bid document to grab attention to each of the subs by division to say, hey, pay attention because this may be specified in the plans. Additionally, this may be specified in the design book. Make sure you don't miss that.
Yeah. Yeah. So anything is like kind of the understanding is like, hey, price this out like you would normally price out any other house in this town, except look for like pay attention to this paragraph of details.
Yeah.
You know, we're doing a this tankless water heater on a circ loop. We've got wall hung toilets in these 3 locations. I want to use PEX A. And this many feet of yard lines going in the house. So I try to, every time I've lost money on like not communicating clearly with my subs and had that hiccup of like, oh, why'd I get a bill for $300 extra? Oh, it's because you did this. I'm like, well, I always do that, but you didn't know that. So maybe I need to write it in my specifications next time.
So from that aspect, you know, thinking about the budget, are you typically cost plus or lump sum, or do you do both?
Yeah, so we're all, I call it fixed price. So it's just like you're buying a car. If you're going to buy a car, it's $48,000. Here's everything that comes in it. That's it.
So how in the world are you doing that right now, you know, in this market?
Yeah, I didn't say it was easy. I just said I was doing it. No, luckily,
so have you thought about that and said, well, maybe I should rethink this, you know?
So, yeah, I have fared fairly well, okay, decent. There's only one job I have that's kind of really taking a wash on. I'm not paying for it yet. I still have profit in there, but not nearly as much as what I used to. But in the contract I use, there is what's called an escalation clause. So, okay. And I've never had to use it. So this is my 15th year of business. Up until last year, I've never even had to think about using this escalation clause. And essentially says, initially it was set up at 25%. And I think it came about, we had a hurricane back in the early 2000s that took out an OSB plan, and then plus everyone was buying OSB, and it shot up to like $60 a sheet. And so they put in this escalation clause to kind of protect against those weird outliers. And then lo and behold, I guess the pandemic is one of those outliers.
So you mentioned 25% though. So the way that you're justifying that is, is it on material? Is it on material labor? Is it on total cost?
It's material only, and really lumber and steel have been the biggest 2 problems. Going forward, I've started to do lumber as an allowance item to kind of get out of that
offset
risk.
That.
Yeah, and then that's another reason to use the same vendors over and over and over again is they're going to stick to their pricing rather well. And I tell them, I was like, hey, listen, guys, like I'm a fixed price builder. Don't, like if you're a sheetrock guy and you know I'm starting the project tomorrow, you're not going to be hanging sheetrock in there for 6 months. Like, don't give me today's pricing. Like, I'm okay if you give me that, 7% increase that you know is coming down the road in 3 months. Go ahead and give that to me now in your quote so that you don't have to change it whenever you stock the house with sheetrock.
So that's interesting. So to bridge that, you have escalation clause to protect you if you need it. You are over communicating from scope as well as with the subcontractors to say, hey, be upfront that, hey, if you're bidding drywall and I have 8 months of site work, plan for 10, 12, 14 months out, whatever that may be. And then additionally, if it is something that does vary tremendously, then you are, even though you're fixed price, you're still doing allowance. Now, being that you're fixed price, you have clients come back and say, hey, Luke, you're fixed price. How can you guarantee the lumber allowance, or do you even go down that path with them?
Well, I open up the LBS stock market ticker and I show them, this is what lumber's done in the last 2 years. Like, your lumber's an allowance. We're pricing it out right here in the graph. It can continue to go down. It could spike again. Like, instead of saying 80,000, like maybe say I did the takeoff and it's $80,000 worth of lumber. Like, do you want to leave that at 80, or do you want to tell the bank it's 100 to give yourself some
for some contingency?
So I'll walk them through that. Yeah, I'll walk them through that conversation.
That's interesting. So you'll walk them through that, based on contingency, like they may have to have that contingency with the bank. Do you ever have clients push back though, saying, and the reason I bring that up, I do cost plus. Like, I used to be lump sum, but now we're cost plus. And, every market's different. Every client's different, our process and stuff. what I found is even at cost plus, like we try to be good stewards, as you mentioned early in this conversation, that we try to contract everything, forecast, lock in, purchase, store, material if we have to. On occasion, there's things we can't because they're too far out or there's nowhere to store them. I mean, there's some limitations with some. I mean, when you're doing a big house, there just are. And the common question is a client will say, well, what could you have done, Brad, to like forecast this, And I'm like, well, that's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of things that we're trying. We're catching ABC, but, some of this stuff I can't. I can't order your concrete. Where am I going to put it? And so there's some things that are a little bit more open-ended that are a little difficult, or masonry block or steel.
I think guys that do cost plus have to go over the top explaining to their clients the risk they're taking on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you understand this is a cost plus contract. Like, if we have to spend $15,000 extra to go with the next subcontractor because the one we wanted to go with is either no longer in business or too busy, like, that's on you. If lumber goes up, it's on you. Like, you're taking on this risk for the potential of it being a low price. It is a risky business.
It is a risky business, and I'm glad you brought that up because no matter whether you're fixed price or lump sum, or I'm sorry, fixed price or cost plus, and this comes down to just us as contractors is. Luke, we're probably the same where there's a lot of mistakes that we could talk about for a couple hours on this podcast that I made having done that, it gives us more experience and confidence as we're having these conversations, where to push back with the client. And also additionally, where to set expectations. Hey, I failed to set this expectation, whether it was timeline or budget. But as you mentioned with cost plus, it's so important as builders that we're setting this expectation of all these variables. And a key one that you just mentioned that not enough builders do or understand is that, hey, if we have an estimate here, your house is going to be, let's say, $1 million, and the electrical line is $60,000. Well, if that electrician backs out, or doesn't do it, or someone passes away, or whatever, which happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got to get someone else. It could be more, and clients have to understand they're taking that risk. But on the flip side, the benefit they're getting is they're getting your price, they're getting open book, they're getting. I don't want to say transparency. It's just a different operation where they're a lot more involved. There's a lot more paperwork behind that. Yeah. And so, but they have to understand who's taking the risk, because for you, Luke, as you mentioned, you have to build in margin in a fixed price because you have to cover all these incidentals that may or may not happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I had a couple of questions. So cost plus, well, let's just say this, let's say risk. How many homes have you built?
As a company or like in my career?
I mean, sure. In your, well, let's just say as AFT, how many homes?
AFT. I mean, I would say we're probably over 60, right? 60 homes in our.
How many homes have your clients built?
Well, that's the thing, and this
really might be their first or second home to build. And are they the expert in construction? Like, hopefully they would realize that this guy's built 60 homes. He's the expert. He understands that sometimes we've got to pay this guy $800 to come back and fix this guy's work because he's never coming back, and there's no way to get the money back out of him. So anyway, that's one of the reasons I do fixed price is I've built 60 plus homes, and it's hard to let someone else run my business,
Yes.
And so it's like when clients start holding money back, like, well, I don't think I should pay this draw because I need this fixed and this done first. And I'm like, that's not how this industry works. Like, it's hard to explain it. And it takes a lot of time and energy to explain that to every new client you have.
Yeah, it really does. But along those lines, even on a cost plus, I mean, keep in mind that we're not giving a hard proposal in a cost plus market. When you're sitting down with the client, you're giving them essentially an estimate for the bank.
Yeah.
But oftentimes the bank is going to lock that in. And so the client is fiscally responsible for anything that goes over that, cash out of pocket. Yeah. And so to your point, even on a cost plus, everything is at cost. But I'll give a good example of like excavation. We do a lot of hillside work. So in our excavation line, we're putting in contingencies for the client, whether hard dig, that we could have so many hours of hard dig. We could have an allowance for like final grading, touch-up grades. And so it's itemized. We're putting that in there. And essentially it's an allowance. So we're still accounting for these costs. And so there definitely is, when you're doing cost plus, there has to be a lot more in-depth, expectations, all these things you're mentioning. And so
Yeah.
It's not for everybody, right? Both sides.
Like, would you say like it's pretty wise to put in 20% extra as a contingency and tell that client that money is spent? Like, don't expect for me to write you a big check at the end of this. That 20% is already spent. We don't know where it's going yet.
Yeah, I think it varies. And I'll give a couple examples. If it's like painting, if you're going to give them budget 50 grand, essentially you're going to be pretty close to that, right? So you may have a couple thousand in there for like punch or like touch up, maybe some QC stuff. Same as drywall, we may say, hey, here's your bids, 50,000, but we're going to put 55,000 in there, a little 10%, because drywall, there's typically, maybe some, even though we are checking all our framing and we're straight edging the house, there could be some things. It's still lumber, it's still wood, right? So there are some things there. Overall, as a contingency, we typically ask them to put like 3%. Ideally, they have a 3% of the cost. It's like a contingency line just for overages. So some things may be less, some things may be pretty even, like countertops.
So you'll sprinkle some specific contingencies throughout the cost codes, and then you'll have an overall 3%.
Correct.
On everything. Okay.
Yeah, and then we let them know this is an estimate. This is our best guess, and we're pretty accurate. I mean, by the end of the job, we've done enough projects that we've been pretty close. We try to lumber. That one's tough. I mean, right now it depends on what time of the market. So
right.
Lumber, we're like, hey, here's your allowance, and really, there's like no allowance that can justify this because it could go way down and it could go like 5 times the price. So
yeah,
that part's hard.
So how do you do your cash flow? I think that's our next topic of conversation.
Yeah, good question. So cash flow as in just be doing cost plus because you're always in arrears or
yeah. How do you guys handle that?
Yeah. So for me is to be transparent here. I mean, we're billing deposits. So we have a couple things. We have PSAs. So we have our professional service agreements. So we're billing our time in pre-con, which on my projects typically last anywhere from 8 months to 2 years, before we break ground. And it varies to the size of projects, complexity, the HOAs, there's a lot of approvals for different HOAs and then the city. And then in Phoenix, it's a little unique because we do have flood zones. So we're dealing on a national level with like FEMA, right? And so that can take a longer time to get through the civil side. And so that consulting over the 8 to 16 months, we do have, it's typically a set fee with every customer, depending on the project for that PSA. So that helps cover some of our pre-con numbers. And then for billing, when we break ground on a project, we charge a deposit. So it's a significant deposit to start construction. And that helps us, I'm not a bank, right? I can't.
Yeah, no joke.
You got to feed the meter. If you want us to build your home, feed the meter. It's not my house. Like I have to financially, cash flow is king. And so we have to have, being that most banks will have limited number of draws per client, or they have, some banks are like, hey, even if you have unlimited draws, you can only do one every 30 days. Well, that's going to put me in a tough bind to keep prompt pay going, right, and keep guys moving. So we set it up where we have deposits that keeps the meter running, gives us cash flow, where if I have to float a deposit, I can, then bill for it and capture it on the next pay application. And so fortunately, knock on wood, we've been very vigilant about deposits. And one thing to answer your question, Luke, and maybe we'll get into this as we talk about internal systems, but one thing that's unique with where we are as a company now, I have 17 employees. So at the end of the month, when we're doing our pay application draws, I send out my controller, one of my accountants, and I'll send out my director of ops with my superintendent coordinator. So everyone that's assigned to that job is going through the schedule. They're forecasting what's coming over the next 30 days and 90 days. Here's the deposits that are coming up, windows, appliances, tile, whatever it may be. Here's the lead time on some of these things. So as a team, ideally, hopefully, these 4 or 5 people that are on site every month are physically on the project. They know where it stands. They know what's upcoming, and we can forecast those deposits because it's all about making sure you're billing in adequate time and having the backup. But again, going back to the risk, if I'm giving deposit to X contractor, I better make sure they have the material. They're not robbing Peter, pay Paul, because if they go under, go bankrupt, which happened in 2009 and 10, and you hand them a deposit, they close the next day, that puts me in a tough position. So there's a lot of cross-checking with the client and the subcontractor to make sure we're partnering with the right people.
Yeah.
How about you?
So with fixed price, I do milestone draws. And so we'll try to get 10% as the initial contract execution draw. And then whenever there's probably about 9 or 10 milestones throughout the project. So slab pour, frame dried in, mechanicals done, insulation done, drywall, It's not, you're not paying just for the drywall, but you're paying for everything up to that point. It's just having the drywall finished means that you can start putting in your trim. So they're kind of triggers throughout the process. And then throughout the years, I've established percentages to put on each one of those draws to make sure that I always have money in escrow and I'm not being the bank.
So do you find it challenging milestones, which I understand most fixed people and remodel, and I'll give a good example. So like I know a remodel company, and what they do is I sat down with them and he said, Brad, if it's a 12-week job, I divide the total value. So let's just say easy math, it's 120 grand over 12 weeks, and he'll divide it over 12. And he just says, I'd bill 10 grand every week. They need to pay every Friday 10 grand. It's just divided by that number. And if they don't pay me, then I pull off the job and it's on pause. And in his defense, he says, but at the same time, like I promised them that there won't be 48 hours without someone on the job. Right. And I'm still matching my schedule. And so he has just a clean way. It's in his contract. That's how he bills it. It's a little bit longer process for you, a little bit more complicated. Do you find an issue with cash flow if it's just milestone driven, where it's like, hey, at initial signing, at concrete, at framing, at four-way, whatever it may be, as opposed to maybe like a work in progress, even though it's still fixed price?
Yeah, no, I've figured out those percentages to cover it. But if we're doing some project that's got a window budget where we're using, some fancy European windows that are 2x normal windows, I'll take a couple percentage points from the middle of the project and throw it towards probably the slab draw, so that we have that money there to pay deposits and get those going.
Now, do you ever have clients have issues? Because at some point, whether you're cost plus, taking a big deposit at the beginning, and as you're billing throughout the process, you get to the end, right? And same as fixed price with milestones, at some point, taking a 10% deposit, there's going to be, this stare down, if you will, where the client's like, hey, I need to have skin in the game from you to get the punch list done. We as a builder are like, hey, we need to be paid in full for warranty to kick in. We're an honorable contractor. We're going to get this done. So it's this really fine line where we're being held hostage for final payment. The client wants to have leverage. We're trying to get the project down. We're trying to get people to come back, but we still need to be paid.
Right. So what we do when clients have that issue, the last draw is typically the CO draw, which just signals substantial completion. We get the paperwork from the city that says this is a healthy or a safe functioning house. So sometimes we'll get full payment then, and clients that maybe have been burned in the past and are a little nervous about that, we'll sit down and say, hey, what would make you comfortable? Like, we're going to finish this punch list. I'm not going to be in business 15 years and screw people over every time. So hopefully, you can trust me, but I understand you want to make sure that you're holding the power with that. So do we hold 5,000? Do we hold 10,000 of that final payment until all punch list items are done? I'm fine with that. And that usually appeases the concern.
I love that you brought that up. And the reason being is this is something, going back to setting expectation of clients, is that from the very beginning, and this comes from the commercial background I've worked in, is that whenever you get to the end of a project, say on a hotel or like a big development project, there's always a working punch list, right? Maybe you're missing some landscaping, missing a monument sign. I mean, whatever it is. And so what ends up happening is with like architect, developer, builder, you sit down and you assign a value to the punch list. So let's say you have 20 punch list items. The monument sign's missing. Okay. The actual cost of the monument sign is $15,000. So we're going to assign a punch list value of 25 grand. So whatever it is, that number's assigned per the punch list of value. So in that way, as that item gets checked off, you get funded that right away once they sign off. And it still gives enough skin in the game where, let's just say I disappear, that the client still can pay that off. Because what we don't want to happen is a client owes you, Luke, $200,000 on last draw, and you have like some painting touch-ups, maybe a piece of baseboard missing, a cabinet door or something, maybe an appliance that you're waiting for. So you probably have like 20 grand of things, and they're holding back 200 grand.
And so it's funny. Whenever it gets down to that final list or that final item, let's just say it's a cap on a pipe on the outside of the house that the plumber just cannot get around to putting on, right? Eventually he's the last one, and I'll call him up and be, hey, that's a $10,000 cap that I need you to install for me. And like, oh, really? I didn't know you were waiting on me. I'm like, yeah, I've been emailing you for 3 weeks to go put that cap on, and now it's holding back final payment. So get over there.
So you actually tell the trades that's how much that's costing you.
Yeah.
But essentially the game plan here is what you and I are on the same page is that now, at this point in our career, ideally we've set the expectation at the beginning of the project and at the end that, hey, there'll be a punch list. I mean, we're doing our team walk. Like tomorrow I'm taking my team. We're doing our AFT team walk. It's all 17 people punching the house. I mean, ideally they move without a punch list.
I totally stole that from you, by the way.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. After I think you posted about it one time, I'm like, that's so awesome. So we're doing team power punches now. Yeah, we call them power punch.
I love it. Yeah, it's funny. I know Tom at Last Creek uses them, and he's like been tagging me. And so a lot of builders have, and it's awesome. Like tomorrow, we just had a new hire. We brought on a new super this week. And so it's great too, because now you're in the field. He gets to meet everybody, and I bring all 17 of my employees. We go punch the house for 3-4 hours. And there's 6 weeks left till this house is complete. And now hopefully we have, my superintendent's the scribe, and he gets audited. All 17 of us are like just picking them apart, like,
right.
And it's actually Paul. So, Paul, we're going to Paul's house. And so fortunately we have the camaraderie as a company where everyone knows, hey, this isn't like anything personal, because you get snowblind. You look at things.
Yeah. You got to get 17 new eyeballs in there, and they're going to see something that, Paul's, for those listening, you don't see what I'm doing with my face, but, you're 2 inches away from the project with your nose the whole time, and you don't see that massive hole in the sheetrock in the closet. You've walked by it 20 times, but getting some fresh eyes in there, it's really powerful to get that list complete, so that when you do present it to the client, you're not going to have those embarrassing moments where you see that.
Yeah, and how valuable for like Paul, where, there's a little audit, if you will, where it's kind of like, I should have had that done or noticed that, but which happens, and we're human, and we want to take pride in our work. But at the same time, you're like, I have 17 people give me a running punch list. That now I can get this out to the trades. I can knock this out in the next 6 weeks. And ideally, I'm turning over a house where now the client's not going to pick me apart because it's done. Yeah. And if there are some items left over, then we attribute a value to them. And as those are done, we get finance. And fortunately, we've had some good clients. And I'm glad you brought this example up, Luke, because we just went through one. And same thing. It was a big amount they're holding back. And I sat down with the client. I said, look, you guys know we're good for it. I have 6 young kids. Like, I'm not going anywhere. We're here for long term. But irregardless, like, you need some confidence. Let's assign a value to these items, and here they are. And they were super fine with that. We held back, $50,000 is what we agreed to. They funded the rest immediately. And then as we chipped those off, which only took us about 7 days, they funded in full. So it just, it's a good strategy, residential, commercial, to get through that.
Yeah. Cool.
So system-wise, Luke, what are you doing? Because I know you're a super systems guy. We talked about your accounting. We talked about your communication with the clients and how you do your draw schedule. Are there other software systems, training, how big is your company? How are you organizing just the entire company at this point?
Yeah. So you're a basketball guy, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So if I were to fly in and you pick me up at the airport and we go to some park with a basketball court and we find 8 other guys, so we can have 2 teams. We could all play basketball, right? Like, I don't even know those guys' names. I've never met them before. We could play a game of basketball. Everybody knows the rules. And so it's super simple. And even if one of those guys gets injured, like, someone else could step in and we could keep playing the game. So I kind of attribute my processes to that example. Like, so and this all got born out of necessity. For 5 years, I was just a single owner operator wearing every single hat in the company. And whenever I made my first hire, I was like, I've got to get some processes down, because if I'm going to go have a 2-hour meeting with a client and my construction manager is not there, I don't want to have a 2-hour meeting with my construction manager, right? And then waste a whole nother day, and then I might miss something. And so I got to start thinking about systems. How can I make red lines on the plans that we don't have to talk about it? He can just pull up the plans and see them, or get notified through whatever software we're using. If we make a spec change, he's going to open up the specs. He's going to see red line spec changes. And also now that we're up and running, I've got 4 project managers. I've got an office administrator. If one of my project managers needs to take a 1.5 week vacation, he just says, Hey, John, you want to cover my projects while I'm gone? John says, sure. That's all they have to say. So
let me ask you, do you know when they're taking vacation, or do they ask each other?
No, I know. I keep a master schedule, and I can't have everybody out at the same time.
Yeah, but
So,
essentially, I guess what I'm getting at is that they may be asking you for the time off, but they're not saying, "Hey, Luke, I'm gone," and you're having to pick up the pieces to figure out who to assign.
correct. No, no, no. I was like, hey, you get with another project manager. And so Monday morning, that project manager rolls up on his job site, and he's going to open up the schedule. And he's going to see that these 3 items have been scheduled already. They're supposed to be happening later this week. It looks like today I need to schedule this thing. And then he's going to go into the specifications. And he's going to read the specifications for whatever it is he's scheduling. And he's going to go into the bid quote, open up the bid for that contractor, and make sure everything still matches. Any red lines from change orders are copied over. And then he's going to sign off on that quote, and he's going to email it to that vendor and get him on schedule. And then, if he's walking the house and he's like, gosh, how is this? Is this a floating sink or is it a wall mount faucet? He can open up the specifications in that job folder and get to the information he needs and make sure that things are getting done right.
So that's interesting. So from the software side, though, how are you managing, punch lists, ongoing punch lists, communication, schedules? How are you managing that?
Yeah, so for plan management, which I used to not think was a big deal until I started getting into some more complex projects, plan management and punch lists, I use a software called PlanGrid, and it's really powerful. Let's say you have a 50-page set of plans from an architect, and then they come and they do a big site meeting with the client. They decide to make a couple changes, and then they issue a whole new set of plans. 50 pages of new plans. PlanGrid, you can upload the new file, make sure all the pages are named accurately, and because it knows it has a newer date, it will overlay that plan on the old plans, and then you can actually do a sheet compare to where it will highlight all the areas that are different. And then all your notes, this is the primary driver of why we got it. All of our 50 red lines and annotations on the old set of plans now bleed up to the new set. So we don't have to spend time copying and pasting our notes over. And that was huge for us. And then
I love that. And we're using Bluebeam for that.
Yeah,
do you guys use Bluebeam?
I think it's very similar.
Yeah, so very similar.
Yeah, and then we were using another individual app for punch lists, but PlanGrid has a really robust punch list feature as well. So yeah, you can tag 20 framing items, you can assign them to the framer, you can add pictures with red lines, and then you can filter out, let me see just the framer's list, and then you can email him a link, and he gets a customized, report that has all his punch lists on it.
It's amazing. I mean, there's a light that clicks on, right? When you get to the point, Luke, where you have the systems in line, and it's not that your job's less complicated and you don't have issues like all of us do every day, but you get to that point where your team is finding a replacement when they're out of town. I feel like as a business owner that's when, not that you've arrived, but that's when you're like, okay, like we're on the right track, that you're not having a substitute. You got people in place that are like already looking ahead at that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and with the Power Punch we do, we've got, instead of just having one scribe, there's 3 other PMs in there with their PlanGrid app open. And so they're adding punch items directly to it. They know what sub's responsible, so they can tag them. They're taking pictures, they're redlining. So everyone's just kind of hitting refresh, every 5 minutes to make sure no one's doubling up on a punch item. And so, yeah, there might be half the punch items on that list that the PM didn't enter. But he knows he doesn't have to, because once he filters it out, he knows everyone entered them incorrectly. He just has to manage the fixing of them.
So how many employees do you have? How big is the company?
So I've got 4 project managers and then a business administrator here that is my right-hand lady.
And so 6 of you?
Yeah, total of 6 of us.
So if you don't mind me asking, project manager, reason for the title, is it just based on all the scope of work that they perform, each of them?
Yeah, so it used to be construction manager, and I know it's semantics. There's people,
for
every
sure,
company calls it something different.
Yeah, and it's territorial, and it's like, but still, yeah.
Right. So project manager, because once we start construction, I step completely in the background. They're running meetings with the architect and owner every week. They're the primary point of contact for everything. They're running the show. I'm just behind the scenes making sure they have what they need. And so that's why I call them the project manager instead of just a construction manager.
Yeah, which is very similar to my operation. And it's not like you check out. It's just, there's empowerment, right? And so with empowerment, you're training them. When did you get to the point to make your first hire? What was that challenge? I mean, how have you dealt with the hiring process, which a lot of people have struggled with to find good talent and good managers, right? To just apply their systems.
Yeah, that's the hardest part of this business is hiring people. Hopefully, thankfully, I don't have to do it a lot, but when I do have to do it, I hate it. It's so challenging.
So where did you find your 4 project managers?
Yeah, I guess back to
we're not going to go steal them. I'm just kidding.
I know, right? Yeah. Here's their phone numbers and their email address.
Do they want to move to Scottsdale?
Yeah, maybe. Is there good hunting there? That's probably the primary driver.
They'd have to drive a little bit, but there is good hunting up in northern Arizona. Yeah.
Whenever I first started my company, in the first 5 years, I'd get real busy, and I'm like, okay, maybe it's time to hire that first guy, and then the roller coaster would happen, right? And then it would get real slow, and then, I'm so glad I didn't hire someone, because then I'd probably have to let them go, and then I'd get ramped back up, like, oh, maybe now's the time. It would go back down. And so I was real hesitant to pull the trigger because I never want to get in a situation where I have to let someone go. Like firing someone's one issue, but having to let them go because business is slow, that's just would make me feel like a complete failure. But finally I got to a point to where I had 3 jobs closing and doing through the punch list, and I saw that on the horizon, and I'm like, there's no way I can do this by myself. Even if I worked 18-hour days, there was no way I could get it done by myself. So it was kind of like necessity pushed me over the cliff. And my first hire is still with me, so he's 9.5 years with me now.
Wow.
And I lucked out on that one. In fact, I already knew him, and so when I was looking for someone to hire, another one of my builder buddies mentioned him, and what do you think about him? And I'm like, well, I didn't think he'd even be interested. And my buddy, I think he might have already talked to him, but he's like, you should go talk to him, see what he would think. And so I did, and that was 9.5 years ago. The main thing for him at the time, he wanted a lot of time off. He had four girls, and they were all grown up, still in the household, and he wanted to be able to spend a lot of time with them and take multiple weeks off in the summer times with them to go camp and be an awesome father that he is. And so we were able to work out an arrangement where he got lots of time off, and that worked great.
Has that been a challenge with other employees, or?
His pay scale reflects that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
To a point, but no, that's part of the gig. And even now he's even taking more time off, but he's a really good manager. It's almost like his projects don't suffer, because he's really good. And I know all my guys are going to be listening to this podcast, so they're all doing an amazing job. And you all know who I'm talking about right now.
Yeah, you better not miss that little plug.
Right, yeah. And then business started picking up a little bit of steam, and then I hired my second one. And I think it's when I hired my second one that I changed it from a construction manager to a project manager. And I was like, I don't have time to meet with all these clients all the time on site. And so kind of transitioned more to me being in the office and them being, meeting with clients. And so we had to do some more system changes and updates and adders and make new systems to accommodate that. And then, now we're up to 4. I think when I jumped to 3 project managers is when I also hired the office administrator. And that's also when I got official office space. I was home officing at the time, and I'm like, if I'm going to make this jump, I need to get out of this home office. We were doing a homeschool hybrid where we had all of our kids were at home half the week, so that was getting crazy and loud, and I couldn't just hide myself in a room anymore.
And you got 4 kids, and what are their ages?
Yeah, so right now they're 14, 12, 10, and 8.
Yeah, so that's crazy, and they were all at home.
Yeah. So got official office space, hired my third PM, hired an office administrator. And so, now we're up to, like I said, 4 PMs, 1 office administrator, and myself.
I'm just amazed at your efficiency. And the reason I say that is because, you accomplished quite a deal with just 6 of you. And I know from running custom homes, it's extremely complicated, tricky. There's just a lot of things to manage, right? Especially with purchasing and ordering and deposits and submittals and RFIs and, all these things that we go through, even if, like in my case where I ideally have everything selected, plans, specs, design books, everything's done before we start. Doesn't matter if things are discontinued. We still have to get submittals. We have to get HOA approvals. And so, I have coordinators that chase a lot of that down. So I'd imagine your project managers are chasing down samples, submittals, and, purchasing and working with you on deposits and everything that goes along with that.
Yeah, we try to get everything done up front. So they're not like all the quotes are done. Whenever it comes down to design selections, we'll send them to my rep at like say Ferguson's for their appliances. And so I try to take all that off the PM's plate so he doesn't have to deal with it. So his primary goal is running the schedule, making sure it gets built accurately, and meeting with the clients. Like that's mainly their job.
Yeah, and I agree. I would say we're on the same page there. I mean, and more what I was speaking to is like, at least for our HOAs, we have to build mock-ups, right? So we have to have roof tile samples, and we have to do synthetic stucco color samples, swatches, and we have to have a little baby window installed, right, to show the setback. And so, I mean, it's just all these little things you have to chase down that can be pretty cumbersome. But
so sometimes we'll have interior designers that are getting paid directly by the owner, and sometimes they'll help out with stuff like that. Right.
Yeah. And same here. I ideally outsource all that. And so, and this one will bring you on, Luke. I mean, it's amazing just listening to you, because I've known you, as you mentioned early in the conversation. We met at KBiz, and we've been friends through Instagram mostly, and both have the same desire to grow the industry. I know you do. I enjoy following you in your accounts and seeing everything you post, and just I already knew this about you, and mostly because I talked to Matt and he tells me about you, but which is a huge compliment. I mean, everyone knows Matt and he speaks so highly of you, but for those listening, I think it's really powerful and empowering that, to see someone such as yourself that came in production, has built this amazing business, so efficient, and not just from an efficiency accounting that you've built your own software, but also just your desire to grow the industry and build beautiful homes that are efficient, that are healthy, that, are sustainable. And so kudos to you, Luke.
I appreciate it. Yeah. I think thinking about, so I try to have my PMs handle 2 projects at a time. That's ideal. It doesn't always work out like that way. Sometimes really big projects, it's just one PM, one job. And so you kind of have to weed out. And this also kind of ties into the cost plus fixed price deal. Like if a project gets really complicated, it probably has to be cost plus, because we don't have the details to the point of where I can bid it out. Like I can't do it. And so so I only look for projects of a certain size, certain detail, where I think my PMs can handle 2 at a time. And so when you start getting me these, we were always building a prototype, but when you're really building a prototype, those jobs have to be cost plus, and it's kind of like you have to have 1 PM, 1 project. And then the pay scale, you got to make sure that the cash flow, if he's only got 1 job, he better be bringing in the same cash flow as those other PMs that have 2 jobs. And so kind of as a business high level looking at it, you're looking at cash flow per month of, should I take on 3 jobs at this size or 2 jobs at this size? How does, the efficiency of what each PM can take on? All kinds of different lenses you can look at it through.
It's interesting because we didn't get into the ideal client or marketing, but, early in this conversation, when we were talking about homes and experience of our clients, the reality is, having clients that have built 2 or 3 homes, right? It's going to, for me, in my market, it's going to be a much better process. They've been through it, so it's less expectations off the set to really cover everything, right? Because they've been through it. And so there's enough I can cover to understand how we do things. To your point too, it's not just ideal client, making sure there's a marriage between that client and us as we vet them, but it's also understanding our lane, right? Our marketing strategy, what projects we want to bring in. Because it may be easy, Luke, for you to say, okay, someone's building this 50,000 square foot, Elon Musk calls you and says, build my house, but you may say, hey, this isn't really like our specialty, because like this is our formula and here's what we want to do. Not saying you wouldn't say no to that, but there may be a strategy to say, these are the projects we're taking on because I know that we can be successful at them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a project come across my desk a couple of months ago from an architect that we've done lots of jobs with. And it was one of those over the top. Curved glass doors, basements, which we don't do basements here in central Austin. Just over the top, like crazy cladding systems, was going to be absolutely gorgeous. And it's one of those, I'm like, if I was like semi-retired and it was just me again, like I would love to take this on because it would build me up so much. I'd love to do it. What a great challenge. I'd be perfect for it, right? But it wasn't good for my company. Like even though I would love to do it, and I knew that I could probably personally do it, and if it was my only job, it would be awesome. But there's no way that we would be successful in our company to do it. So I had to pass on it. And I was a little humbled by it because I had to tell the architect all this. And I was like, I'd love to, but I don't think as a company we can take this one on. Yeah.
Well, kudos to you, because that is a hard conversation. When you see something that may be like a trophy worthy on Instagram that you could publish social media, it's hard to turn that down, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you do for fun?
We love the outdoors. So my wife and I, we met rock climbing, and then we're somehow shocked when our kids love to climb trees and scare our neighbors half to death. But no, we used to mountain bike all the time. Even now, like we love to go outdoors, really into sports. My wife was really into sports in high school, and our kids are starting to get into sports. And so we're always busy going to gyms and fields and swim team. Shout out to the Balcones Woods Blue Wave. We just won our championship.
Wow, congrats.
Weekend, so that was fun. That's really big in our neighborhood. But yeah, I love the outdoors. We love to RV. So we bought a travel trailer 2.5 years ago. And probably like Matt and I took that big epic trip together last summer.
You guys went like on a 3-week trip or something.
Yeah, like up to Glacier National Park. And it was awesome. It was a lot of hard work. No one got injured, and we came back with all of our equipment.
That's good.
But that was a lot of fun. In fact, next week we're leaving on a 2-week trip. I'm heading back up to Colorado and on to North Dakota, and the Reisingers are going off to the East Coast and then to Florida Beach. So we're not together this summer. We're kind of bummed about it, but maybe next year.
Well, good for you guys. That's amazing. So, Luke, for those that have been listening, where can they find you?
So Instagram is probably my primary one. So at Mezger Homes. It auto feeds to the Facebook page of the same name, but I'm most active on Instagram.
Well, Luke, you've been amazing. Again, kudos to you and your business and what you've built and achieved and continue to achieve. So thank you for making time.
Yeah, I appreciate the time, Brad.